The air over Kip's Bay on Manhattan Island crackled with something more than September heat on the morning of September 15, 1776. It was the sound of an empire's fury unleashed. 5 British warships, anchored just 200 yards offshore in the East River, erupted in a deafening, thunderous barrage. For the 450 inexperienced Connecticut militiamen huddled in shallow trenches along the shore, it was the sound of the world ending. 80 cannons hurled a relentless storm of iron at their flimsy defenses. These were not seasoned soldiers. Many were farmers and artisans, some armed with little more than crude pikes fashioned from farming scythes, and they had never conceived of such industrial-scale violence. Under the hurricane of shot and shell, their line, their courage, and their discipline evaporated. They broke and ran. The panic was infectious, spreading to nearby units as 4,000 British and Hessian troops in 84 flatboats rowed from Long Island, landing on the shore almost entirely unopposed. 4 miles north in Harlem, General George Washington heard the roar of the guns and spurred his horse south. What he rode into was not a battle, but a rout. He arrived to find his men, the soldiers of the nascent American cause, streaming past him in a torrent of fear. "To my great surprise and mortification," he would later write, "I found the troops that had been posted in the lines retreating. This was more than a tactical failure. It was a moment of profound humiliation, coming on the heels of the miraculous but morale-shattering evacuation from Long Island, where Washington had narrowly saved his army from annihilation. There he had shown genius in retreat. Here he saw only cowardice. In one of the few instances where the general's legendary composure completely shattered, he flew into a volcanic rage. He galloped into the fleeing mob, shouting and cursing, trying to rally them behind stone walls. When words failed, he struck at officers and men with the flat of his sword, his voice raw with fury and shame. Oblivious to his own safety, he rode to within 80 yards of the advancing Hessian vanguard before his horrified aides seized the bridle of his horse and physically dragged their commander from the field, saving him from certain death or capture. The Battle of Kip's Bay was a disaster, a clear British victory that would cost the Americans New York City for the remainder of the war. For Washington, it was a searing lesson that the greatest threat to his army was not always the enemy in front of it, but the weakness and division within it. This was not a new lesson, merely its most brutal telling. A year earlier, in the frozen winter of 1775, the same internal fractures had revealed themselves, not under cannon fire, but in a flurry of snowballs. The scene was witnessed by one of the Army's youngest soldiers, Israel Trask, a 10-year-old boy from Massachusetts serving as a regimental cook and messenger. The Continental Army, then besieging the British in Boston, was less a unified force than a tense coalition of colonial militias who viewed one another with deep suspicion. Trask watched as a regiment of Virginia riflemen, frontiersmen clad in buckskin hunting shirts, encountered a group of New England soldiers, sailors and fishermen in their distinctive round jackets and fisher's trousers. The New Englanders looked with scorn upon the Virginians' rustic attire, and what began with ridicule and derision quickly escalated. Snowballs, at first soft missives, soon became hard-packed ice. The taunts gave way to fists, and the snowball fight devolved into a full-scale riot, a fierce struggle, with biting and gouging that consumed hundreds of men. Just as the brawl reached its violent crescendo, a powerful figure appeared. General Washington, mounted on his horse, saw the chaos from a distance. As Trask remembered it, the general threw the reins to a servant, vaulted over a fence in a single motion, and strode directly into the heart of the melee. Without hesitation, he seized 2 of the brawling soldiers, one from Virginia, one from Massachusetts, by the collars, shaking them like rag dolls. His commanding presence, a physical embodiment of authority, radiated through the crowd. The fighting stopped instantly. Order was restored not by a speech, but by a raw, physical assertion of will. Through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy, the fractious colonies witnessed a man capable of forcing them into a single, unified army. These two moments, the fury at Kips Bay and the forceful calm at Cambridge, reveal the true nature of Washington's early command. His war was fought on two fronts. One was against the disciplined might of the British Empire. The other, far more complex, was against the internal chaos of his own army, an army of amateurs, divided by fierce regional loyalties and unaccustomed to the rigors of military life. His leadership was forged in these moments of internal collapse. He had to be more than a tactician. He had to become the singular force holding a fragile revolution together, sometimes with a calming hand, and sometimes, as the men at Kips Bay learned, with the flat of his sword. The war was not just for American independence, but for the very soul of the army fighting for it, a struggle witnessed firsthand by the boys like Israel Trask, who saw its heroes not as marble statues, but as complex, passionate, and fallible men. The Continental Army that marched across the landscapes of the Revolution was far more than a column of soldiers. It was a sprawling, chaotic, and indispensable moving city. While history focuses on the generals and the battles, the Army's very survival depended on a vast, shadow community of civilians known collectively as camp followers. These were not mere appendages to the military machine. They were its lifeblood. The 1776 American Articles of War officially defined them as all sutlers and retainers to a camp and all persons whatsoever serving with the armies of the United States. This broad category encompassed a diverse cross-section of colonial life. Sutlers, who were merchants selling provisions, civilian employees like wagoners and artisans, and retainers, the thousands of women, children, servants, and enslaved people who followed the army out of necessity, familial duty, or the simple search for safety and sustenance. These forgotten revolutionaries performed the thankless, essential tasks that the chronically underfunded Continental Congress could not. With no established protocols for supplying and feeding the troops, the Army was in a constant state of logistical crisis. It was the camp followers who filled this void. Women served as washerwomen, cooks, nurses, and seamstresses, their labor crucial for maintaining the hygiene and health of the soldiers. They scavenged for supplies, mended uniforms, and cared for the sick and wounded, forming a tight-knit community that was fundamental to the Army's ability to function day to day. They were, in effect, the unofficial Quartermaster Corps, a mobile support system without which the Army would have collapsed from disease and starvation long before it ever met the British on the field. The stories of these individuals, long absent from official military histories, have been preserved in a remarkable and democratic archive, the Revolutionary War Pension Files. In the early 19th century, the U.S. government allowed veterans and their widows to apply for pensions, requiring them to provide oral testimony about their service. The resulting 80,000 files, containing over 2.3 million pages, form a history from below, capturing the raw, unvarnished experiences of ordinary people caught in the war's maelstrom. One of the most harrowing of these accounts is that of Sarah Martin. Testifying as an 83-year-old widow, she recalled the relentless terror of living in British-occupied New Jersey while her husband, Gershom, was away on militia duty. Her family's roadside home was ransacked as many as 30 times. In one appalling scene, drunken British soldiers stormed into her house and demanded she cook them ham and eggs. As her youngest child cried, one of the hostile officers threatened to kill the infant, wielding his sword and striking the child. When Sarah intervened to protect her baby, the soldier's blade gave her a severe cut across the arm. This was not a battle, but it was the brutal reality of the war for countless civilians whose homes became the front lines. The spectrum of service and suffering extended far beyond the camps and occupied homesteads. For African Americans, the fight for liberty was fraught with unique perils. James Fortin, a free black teenager from Philadelphia, joined the crew of an American privateer at the age of 14. When his ship was captured, he faced a fate worse than that of his white comrades. Most captured black Americans, regardless of their free status, were sold into slavery in the West Indies. Fortin was befriended by the son of the British captain and offered a comfortable life in England, but he refused to renounce his American identity. As a result, he was sent to one of the infamous British prison ships anchored in New York Harbor. These decaying hulks were floating coffins, where thousands of prisoners were crammed into suffocating, disease-ridden spaces. Survivors recalled eating moldy bread and rancid meat, and drinking toxic water from the East River. Corpses were simply tossed overboard, their remains washing up on the Brooklyn shore for years. Fortin endured 7 months in this hell before being released in a prisoner exchange, after which he walked 100 miles home to Philadelphia. While many women served behind the lines, some found themselves in the heart of the fighting. The iconic figure of Molly Pitcher is a composite of several real women who took up arms. One such woman was Mary Ludwig Hayes. At the sweltering Battle of Monmouth in 1778, her husband, a cannoneer, was wounded. Without hesitation, she took his place at the cannon, helping to load and fire the heavy gun. Joseph Plum Martin, a private who witnessed the scene, recorded a stunning moment of her bravery. A cannon, shot from the enemy, passed directly between her legs without doing any other damage than carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat, he wrote. Looking at it with apparent unconcern, she observed that it was lucky it did not pass a little higher, and then continued her occupation. Impressed by her valor, General Washington himself reportedly designated her a non-commissioned officer. The stories of Sarah Martin, James Fortin, and Mary Ludwig Hayes, preserved in pension files and soldiers' memoirs, fundamentally reshape our understanding of the Revolution. They reveal that the war was not won by generals alone, but by the collective resilience of an entire society, by the women who defended their homes, the children who endured captivity, and the camp followers whose forgotten labor kept the army in the field. As the Continental Army struggled for survival on the battlefield, a second clandestine war was being waged in the streets and parlors of British-occupied cities. This was a war of intelligence, fought not by trained operatives, but by ordinary citizens whose professions and social positions rendered them invisible to a powerful and prejudiced enemy. Their courage, often enacted in quiet defiance, provided General Washington with the critical information that repeatedly saved his army from destruction. Among the most remarkable of these citizen spies was Lydia Barrington Dara, a Quaker midwife from Philadelphia whose pacifist faith belied a steely resolve. In the autumn of 1787, after the British captured Philadelphia, General William Howe established his headquarters in a house directly across the street from the Dara family home. Soon after, British officers commandeered the Dara's large parlor for high-level staff meetings. Because the family were Quakers, a group known for its pacifism and public neutrality, the British officials saw them as no threat. This assumption was a grave miscalculation. On the night of December 2, 1777, the officers ordered the family to their bedrooms and to remain there until a secret meeting had concluded. Lydia pretended to retire, but instead crept to the parlor door, pressing her ear against the wood. She listened as the British laid out their plans for a massive surprise attack against Washington's vulnerable army, then encamped at Whitemarsh, just 16 miles away. The attack was scheduled for 2 days' time. The information was a death warrant for the Continental Army, which was already reeling from defeats at Brandywine and Germantown and was about to endure the brutal winter at Valley Forge. Lydia knew she had to act. The next morning, she concocted a plausible excuse. She needed to travel outside the city to purchase flour from a mill in Frankfort. Receiving an official pass from General Howe himself, she began her perilous mission. She walked for miles through the cold to the mill, deposited her bag, and then continued on to the Rising Sun Tavern, a known haunt for American sympathizers. There she found an American officer and relayed the urgent intelligence. Some accounts suggest she passed him a coded note hidden inside an old cloth needlebook. However she did it, the message got through. When the British marched on Whitemarsh on December 4th, they found Washington's forces prepared and waiting. After several days of inconclusive skirmishing, a frustrated Howe called off the attack. Upon their return to Philadelphia, British officers questioned Lydia, suspecting a leak from her house. She remained perfectly calm, insisting her family had been asleep the entire time. The matter was dropped and her heroic act of espionage remained a secret. In the bustling heart of British-occupied New York City, another unlikely spy was operating in plain sight. Hercules Mulligan was an Irish immigrant, a tailor, and a fervent member of the Sons of Liberty. His shop was a popular destination for high-ranking British officers who came to be fitted for fine uniforms. In the rigid social hierarchy of the 18th century, a tradesman like Mulligan was considered a social inferior, someone in whose presence powerful men would speak freely, never imagining their tailor was listening intently. Mulligan turned this condescension into a weapon. He gathered vital intelligence by eavesdropping on his clients' conversations and by carefully noting the timing and volume of uniform orders, which allowed him to accurately gauge British troop movements. Mulligan's information proved to be of monumental importance, saving General Washington's life on at least 2 occasions. The intelligence he gathered was ferried out of the city by Cato Howe, a man enslaved by Mulligan, who acted as the crucial link to Washington's camp. In 1779, a British officer let slip details of a plot to capture the American commander-in-chief. Mulligan immediately dispatched Cato with a warning, and the plan was thwarted. 2 years later, in 1781, Mulligan's brother, an importer, discovered a British plan to move several hundred troops into Connecticut to intercept and ambush Washington. Once again, a timely warning from the tailor's shop reached the general, preventing a potential catastrophe. The stories of Lydia Darrett and Hercules Mulligan illuminate a fundamental truth about the American intelligence effort. It succeeded by exploiting the enemy's social blindness. The British failed to perceive a threat from a Quaker woman or an Irish tailor because their own prejudices about class and gender made such individuals seem harmless and insignificant. This social invisibility became their greatest asset. Yet the very nature of their success, heroic but ad hoc and perilous, highlighted a critical weakness. Washington, who had valued espionage since his service in the French and Indian War, recognized that relying on the luck and bravery of individual citizens was not a sustainable strategy. The daring missions of Darrett and Mulligan were proof that human intelligence could turn the tide of the war. They also served as the impetus for creating a more organized, secure, and systematic intelligence network, one that could operate with greater safety and efficiency, turning the art of spying into a science. By 1778, the war for intelligence had reached a turning point. The heroic but improvised efforts of citizen spies like Lydia Darrett and Hercules Mulligan had proven the value of espionage, but also its inherent risks. In response, General Washington ordered his young chief of intelligence, Major Benjamin Tallmadge, to create something entirely new, a permanent, professional, and deeply clandestine spy network operating in the heart of British-held New York City. The organization they built, known by its code name Samuel Culper, would become the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation of the war. Its secrecy was absolute. Tallmadge ensured the identities of his agents were so closely guarded that even Washington himself did not know who they were. The architecture of the Culper Ring was a model of security and compartmentalization, a chain of trust where each link performed a specific, vital function. At its center in New York was Robert Townsend, code-named Culper Jr. A seemingly neutral society reporter and dry goods merchant, Townsend used his access to social functions and his business to gather information directly from unsuspecting British officers and loyalist sympathizers. Once he had his intelligence, an elaborate and perilous relay began. Austin Rowe, a tavern keeper from Setauket, Long Island, would ride 55 miles into the city under the guise of buying supplies from Townsend. He would take the hidden message and ride back to Setauket, where he would leave it in a prearranged dead drop, a box buried in a pasture rented by another agent, Abraham Woodhull. Woodhull, codenamed Culper Sr., would retrieve the message from the field next to his house, add his own observations, and then prepare for the most ingenious step in the process. He would look across the bay to the home of his neighbor, Anna Strong. There, hanging on her clothesline amidst the family laundry, would be the signal that determined the next move. Anna Strong had devised a brilliant and deceptively simple communication system. A black petticoat hung on her line meant that Caleb Brewster, the ring's whaleboat captain, had arrived safely and was ready to transport the message across the treacherous British-patrolled Long Island Sound. The number of white handkerchiefs hung beside the petticoat specified which of 6 secluded coves Brewster was hiding in. Under the cover of darkness, Woodhull would sneak to the designated location and hand off the dispatch. Brewster would then row across the Devil's Belt to Fairfield, Connecticut, where Major Tallmadge would be waiting to receive the intelligence and forward it to Washington via a series of mounted dragoons. Anna Strong's clothesline was the ultimate expression of the ring's tradecraft, weaponizing the mundane and transforming an ordinary domestic chore into a vital tool of war. While the core members of the ring are known, its most intriguing figure remains a mystery. In the complex numerical code developed by Tallmadge, the number 355 was the designation for lady. In one of his letters, Abraham Woodhull made a tantalizing reference to the assistance of Agent 355, describing her as one who hath been ever serviceable to this correspondence. Her true identity has been lost to history, but it is widely believed she was a woman from a prominent loyalist family moving in the highest circles of New York society. This position would have given her unparalleled access to British military commanders, including Major John Andre, the head of British intelligence. Many historians believe that it was Agent 355 who provided the crucial intelligence that first uncovered the treason of Benedict Arnold and led to Andre's capture in 1780. Her story, however, may have ended in tragedy. Legend holds that after Arnold's defection, her identity was compromised. She was arrested, and because of her high social standing, she was imprisoned on the notorious British prison ship HMS Jersey. There, it is said, the pregnant spy gave birth to a son before dying in the squalid conditions of the ship. While some historians dispute this account, noting that women were rarely held on the prison hulks, the story of Agent 355 persists as a powerful symbol of the ultimate sacrifice. The genius of the Culper ring lay in its system, its layers of secrecy, its use of codes and invisible ink, and its reliance on the unobservable. Yet, the story of its female operatives reveals a profound paradox. The very skills that made Anna Strong and Agent 355 so effective, their ability to operate under the cover of their gender and social roles, are what have obscured their contributions from the historical record. Their anonymity was their shield, and the mystery surrounding Agent 355 is not a failure of history, but rather the enduring legacy of her success as a spy. Her name may be lost, but her service was instrumental in winning the war. In the bleak winter of 1777-1778, as the Continental Army shivered and starved at Valley Forge, General George Washington faced a threat more insidious than the British Army occupying Philadelphia. This threat came not from redcoats, but from within his own ranks in the halls of the Continental Congress. A loose coalition of disgruntled officers and ambitious politicians began to maneuver against him, questioning his leadership and seeking to replace him as commander-in-chief. This episode, known to history as the Conway Cabal, became the greatest political battle of Washington's military career, a crisis that tested not his tactical skill, but his capacity for political survival. The seeds of dissent were sown in the contrasting fortunes of the war's northern and central theaters. In the autumn of 1777, Washington's main army suffered a string of demoralizing defeats, losing the Battle of Brandywine in September and the Battle of Germantown in October, which ultimately led to the fall of the American capital, Philadelphia. Meanwhile, in upstate New York, General Horatio Gates, a longtime rival of Washington, achieved a spectacular victory, forcing the surrender of an entire British army under General John Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga. This stunning success made Gates the hero of the hour and created a dangerous narrative. Gates was a winner, while Washington was a loser. This sentiment was fanned by influential figures in Congress, such as Samuel Adams and Richard Henry Lee, who began to seriously doubt Washington's ability to win the war. The discontent found its voice in Brigadier General Thomas Conway, an arrogant and ambitious Irish-born officer who had served in the French army. Frustrated by Washington's refusal to support his promotion to Major General over more senior American officers, Conway began a campaign of criticism against his commander. The simmering plot boiled over when a private letter from Conway to Gates was partially exposed. In it, Conway had allegedly written a devastating critique. "Heaven has been determined to save your country, or a weak general and bad counselors would have ruined it." The inflammatory phrase was leaked when Gates's own aide, a young officer named James Wilkinson, drunkenly repeated it to an aide of Major General Lord Sterling, a staunch Washington loyalist. Sterling, horrified by the wicked duplicity, immediately reported it to Washington. Washington's response was a masterstroke of political jiu-jitsu. Instead of launching a public counterattack, he sent a brief, ice-cold note to Conway on November 9, 1787, containing a single damning sentence quoting the "weak general" line back to him. This simple act threw the conspirators into a panic. Conway tried to deny the exact wording, while Gates, realizing his correspondence had been compromised, wrote to Washington demanding to know who was stealing his letters. Washington's critics in Congress, however, initially doubled down. They rejected Conway's bluff resignation, promoted him to the newly created post of Inspector General, and, in a direct challenge to Washington, appointed Horatio Gates as the president of the powerful Board of War, a body that would oversee the Army's administration. Now, at the nadir of his command, Washington skillfully navigated the crisis. He used his opponents' own machinations against them, forwarding their duplicitous correspondence to Congress and demanding that Gates produce the original Conway letter, which they refused to do. As the plot unraveled in public, Washington's true strength became apparent: the unshakable loyalty of his officers. Generals like Nathanael Greene and the Marquis de Lafayette rallied to his side, writing letters to Congress in his defense. Lafayette delivered a crucial blow to the cabal by making it clear that the new French alliance, and all the aid that came with it, was tied personally to Washington's command. Under this pressure, the cabal collapsed. Congress accepted Conway's second, and this time sincere, resignation. The affair ended in a dramatic and fitting fashion. On July 4, 1778, General John Cadwalader, a fierce Washington supporter, challenged Conway to a duel over the slanders. Cadwalader shot Conway in the mouth, reportedly remarking, "I have stopped the damned rascal's lying tongue at any rate." Believing he was dying, Conway penned a final, contrite letter to Washington. "You are in my eyes the great and good man," he wrote. "May you long enjoy the love, veneration, and esteem of these states, whose liberties you have asserted by your virtues." In surviving the Conway cabal, Washington did more than save his career. He affirmed the principle of a stable military command responsible to, but not undermined by, civilian politics. He proved that his greatest strength was not as a tactician on the battlefield, but as a peerless political leader, a skill that would ultimately secure the Revolution and define his future presidency. In the sweltering early summer of 1776, New York City was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The Continental Army, having driven the British from Boston, now braced for the full fury of the Empire's response. A massive British fleet, the largest expeditionary force of the 18th century, was descending on the harbor, and the city itself was a nest of spies and loyalist sympathizers. It was in this atmosphere of extreme tension, just days before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that a most hellish, infernal plot was hatched to decapitate the American Revolution before it was even formally born. The target was General George Washington, and the conspiracy aimed not just to defeat him, but to murder him. The plot was orchestrated at the highest levels of British authority in the colonies. The royal governor, William Tryon, operating from the safety of the warship HMS Duchess of Gordon in the harbor, worked with the loyalist mayor of New York City, David Mathews, to mastermind the conspiracy. Their plan was breathtakingly ambitious. It called for the assassination of Washington and all his senior generals, the kidnapping of key Patriot leaders, the destruction of the Continental Army's ammunition magazines, and the sabotage of its cannons. The final, most treacherous element was to turn members of Washington's own elite personal bodyguard, the commander-in-chief's guard, against him, transforming protectors into assassins. This was to be more than an assassination. One patriot, searching for a word to describe the magnitude of the planned betrayal, called it a sacricide, the slaughter of the good. The key agent in this plot was Thomas Hickey, an Irish-born former redcoat who had deserted the British Army and joined the American cause. He had earned a coveted position as a private in Washington's Life Guard, a unit handpicked to protect the general, his staff, and the Army's treasury. But Hickey's loyalty was for sale. Recruited by Mayor Mathews, he was tasked with a dark mission to corrupt his fellow guardsmen, and, when the time came, to carry out the murder of the commander-in-chief. While several methods were considered, one specific plan has been passed down through history with chilling detail. Hickey was to poison a dish of green peas, one of General Washington's favorite foods, and have them served to him for dinner. The conspiracy, for all its high-level planning, was not uncovered by Washington's intelligence officers or a sophisticated spy ring. It was unraveled by a chain of ordinary, vigilant citizens, the true, unsung saviors of the general. The story of its discovery is told in two versions. The most popular, though less verified, account centers on Samuel Francis, the owner of the Queen's Head Tavern, where Washington often dined, and his daughter, Phoebe. In this telling, Phoebe was serving as Washington's housekeeper. The would-be assassin, Thomas Hickey, became infatuated with her and, in a moment of foolish confidence, revealed the entire plot. Phoebe, horrified, immediately told her father, who rushed to warn the general just as the poisoned peas were about to be served. A more historically documented version is less romantic, but no less dramatic. In this account, Hickey was arrested on an unrelated charge of passing counterfeit money. While incarcerated, he couldn't resist bragging to a fellow prisoner, a man named Isaac Ketchum, about his role in the grand loyalist conspiracy. Ketchum, perhaps hoping for leniency, reported Hickey's treasonous boasts to the authorities. Ketchum's report reached New York's newly formed Committee for Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies, a patriot intelligence body headed by a young lawyer named John Jay. The committee acted swiftly. The plot was exposed, and Hickey was arrested. In one dramatic telling that confirms the poison plot, the suspect peas were fed to a flock of chickens, which immediately sickened and died, sealing Hickey's fate. On June 26, 1776, Thomas Hickey was court-martialed and found guilty of mutiny, sedition, and treachery. 2 days later, on June 28th, he was marched to a field near the Bowery and hanged before a crowd of 20,000 spectators. He was the first soldier of the Continental Army to be executed for treason. Washington ordered his entire army to witness the event, hoping the unhappy fate of Thomas Hickey will be a warning to every soldier. In the end, the question of the boy who saved General Washington finds its answer not in a single hero, but in the collective courage of the common people. Whether it was a young housekeeper, a jailed counterfeiter, or a vigilant tavern owner, Washington was saved by the very citizens for whom the revolution was being fought. The title is a metaphor, a poetic truth representing the network of ordinary men and women whose loyalty formed the bedrock of the American cause. The foiling of the Hickey Plot was more than the preservation of one man's life. Occurring just days before the colonies would declare their independence, it saved the entire revolutionary project from being extinguished in its cradle. The new nation was nearly destroyed not by a foreign army, but by a traitor from within. Its survival was secured by the unseen hands of its most humble patriots.